Becoming Awesome with Peter D. Expand your consciousness. Welcome to Becoming Awesome. I'm your host, Peter D. Today, our guest is Michael Blanshan, and you're in for a real treat. Michael has been a naturopath, but he's also studied what's going on in the world, what's going on in the media, what's going on with government, and has been a co-founder of the Santa Fe Unmasked group. So, let me introduce to you Michael Blanshan.
Thanks for having me, Peter.
Great. So before we get into this, please remember this is the age of AI, and it really would help if you like, share, subscribe, or follow this video or this audio. This will help the computer send it to other people. Now, Michael has lived in Santa Fe for 20 years. He's trained and practiced as a traditional naturopath, having studied various holistic modalities. In recent years, he devoted much of his time to research and education on leading issues around health with regard to media, government policies, and more. After more than 15 years of study in the areas of history, propaganda, social engineering, and media, he's come to refer to this field of study as the study of reality. So eat that, all you conspiracy theorists out there, the study of reality. It's Michael's assertion that if one passively takes in television and news articles without scrutinizing them and their techniques properly, one will never come to a proper understanding of the reality of this world. Michael's currently an activist and consultant. He does interviews and presentations, so it's my pleasure to welcome Michael Blanshan.
Thanks, Peter.
Great. Why don't we start off by just you telling a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I grew up in the Midwest on a small farm. Pretty normal upbringing, but I grew up on television, so I kind of bought into the reality that most of us do.
Oh, isn't that just isn't that the way it works?
Yeah. I didn't know anything was wrong with it. I was watching dumb sitcoms and everything else, and taking in world news at 5 o'clock every day. I had a driving impulse to get out of the country. I really felt I needed to, and so after college, I moved overseas. I lived in Japan for several years.
Nice.
And living in Japan, being outside of America, and not being exposed to the same media and the same style of media that you grew up on, it woke me up. I got to see America from the outside. So instead of being in this bubble of media, seeing it from the outside, kind of the lights came on, and I saw that that's not how reality actually works, the way I grew up and the worldview I had. So lived in Japan for 3 years, and then when I came back, the reintegration into America was probably the most challenging part, because here I was in this bubble of media and information, but I'd seen it from the outside, so I knew it wasn't how things really worked. So that was a great waking process for me, and it was really only about a year or two after that I moved to Santa Fe, got into the holistic healing arts, and that's when my path really started.
Nice. I used to teach media literacy. I call myself Peter Media Literacy Seed because it wasn't even a word when I first started. And I literally traveled the country all over teaching about particularly media around addiction, drugs, alcohol, tobacco. So what you say really interests me. So why don't you tell me what's at the cutting edge of what you have discerned right now?
I look to a lot of different sources, and I think one thing that's helped me the most is I can tell when someone has better information than me. I can tell where their talking points are coming from, if it's coming from the television or the newspaper. And when I hear a journalist like John Pilger or a great investigative journalist like Cheryl Atkinson, this is information I haven't encountered. And so I know to listen and to open my mind and to try and take it in. So there are really great investigative journalists out there, but they don't make it into mainstream news. John Pilger's view, he's a UK-based journalist. He's actually Australian. He's won many prizes. And he has a very different view of the world, but the mainstream doesn't really give him an opportunity to share this view. Cheryl Atkinson, she used to be a CBS investigative journalist. And when she really started to dig and get some real information, her superiors at CBS oftentimes shut her down. So she eventually left CBS, has written 2 books of her own, and you realize that the world works in a very different way than the media leads us to believe. One last example, I made friends with 2 whistleblowers who were in Libya in 2011 when the whole thing went down in Libya.
Mm-hmm.
They did a documentary. They've given many interviews. Their name are James and Joanne Moriarty. And they were on the ground. They were talking with, the ambassadors of various countries as chaos was erupting and they were trying to make it out of the country. And they told their story. And hearing it from the inside and seeing how it was portrayed in the media, you couldn't have a bigger contradiction. And that happens all the time.
Right.
Where the media crafts a reality that doesn't match events on the ground at all.
Yeah. So you said 5 or 6 things I really want to follow up on, because you've just hit the nugget. You just hit the golden kernel. Let's start with the topic of discernment. So when you're watching or viewing, not just media. I mean, these days I was listening to Dr. Christiane Northrup, and she says pretty much anything that's been blacklisted or banned is probably true. So that's one indicator, okay? All right, for health guidance on the media. So, but when you're watching media or even talking to another person or just reading an article, how do you discern? What is your method of discernment for knowing, is this something to pay attention to? Is there something to move away from?
My starting point is I make sure I at least understand what the main arguments are in the media and in the newspapers. Mm-hmm. So I check in. I don't read the newspaper every day, but I check in to see what ideas and stories, what narratives they're pushing. And then when I interact with people, I really just listen. Are they telling me anything that I couldn't hear on the television or the newspaper? And 9 out of 10 times when you're just going about your day, all people are doing is parroting the same sound bites that they've been given.
Here, let me just parrot that for a second. Go ahead.
Exactly. So I'm listening. I'll listen to somebody, and then I'll just see, do they have any original information, or is this the same stuff I could hear anywhere? And most of the times they don't. If someone's giving me original information, well, then the next thing is, okay, do they have any sources? Is it just conjecture? Like for example, one of the things we've seen in these last months is this idea of the Q movement. Okay, in me being someone who really discerns, I'm looking for verification. I'm looking for some evidence that any of this is true. And I'm sorry to say I come up short. I can't find validation for most of those things that they're suggesting. So
yeah, I know they're very hopeful and I like them. But yeah. I'm not sure that I've okay, I still haven't seen anything yet.
Right.
Just more trust me.
Right. So that's one of those things where I might not reject it outright, but I'm going to kind of put it on the shelf and say, okay, until evidence arises, I'm going to put that one on hold. And so for me, the standard I hold myself to is everything I say, I can source it to a whistleblower, a journalist, a credible book, a great author, a PhD, professor, someone who's really done research and who might have established themselves as an expert in an area. And so when I'm interacting with other people and I'm discerning what they're telling me, try and figure out where they're getting their information, and if it's information I haven't heard, I'll listen. I'm not going to shut anything down right away. And unfortunately, that's what we see today. Is so often you present a person with information and they just, if they haven't heard it, they just reject it out.
Right. That's, I'm from Missouri, I'll believe it when I see it. As opposed to the spiritual community, I'll see it when I believe it.
Yeah, there you go.
So a couple of things I just want to throw in there, okay, having studied media and stuff. I remember one research study I saw that said the more news you attend to, the less happier you are. There's direct correlation. The amount of news you attend, your happiness index goes way down, right? So that's kind of interesting, especially in these times of health crisis about the news.
Right.
But I want to talk a little bit about the spiritual or intuitive nature of discernment. So what I've been learning recently is how to use intuition, how to use the connectedness in the oneness field to try to discern information around you. And the technique that I've had the most success with and is the easiest is if I just say my name, I'm Peter T. And then I stop and see how it feels in my body. Then I say something that's not true. I'm Fred Flintstone. And then I stop and feel it in my body. All right? So as I get better and better at that, when people present me bits of information, I can stop and do the name thing real quickly so I have what feels right and what doesn't, and then apply it to that information. And then I get an intuitive sense. Could you comment on anything you think of on ways of not just relying externally for discernment, anything you've noticed internally about how to discern?
I do get a good gut feeling about things. Things can, we use the word resonate, that resonates as true or not. I'm careful about going on feelings because I consider a feeling to be different than intuition.
Okay.
And I say that because the media, in the techniques of propaganda, they appeal to emotions. They appeal to your sense of pride or patriotism or whatever else, and you get this feeling, this
Right, it
emotional
feels good.
feeling, and it feels good. Okay, that doesn't mean that it's accurate. For example, and this is not me being against Obama or for somebody else, but Obama was very skilled in his rhetorical technique.
Oh my God, he was good.
Right?
I got degrees in rhetoric. The man was good.
Exactly. And he displayed a very high degree of training. You don't just end up like that. Someone really trained him and groomed him for that position.
Yeah.
Okay, so the building, his cadence, that creates a type of entrainment, and then his building and waning and the emotional tones of his speeches. I mean, he had a stadium full of people in Denver in 2008 at the Democratic National Convention. The stadium, people crying. And
Oh, yeah.
Hopeful and all this kind of thing. So I talked with a friend afterwards, and I said, yes, but look at Obama's actions. Look what he's actually done since he's been president. She goes, well, my God, I just know he's a good person, and I just know this. And so it's that thing where she was kind of seduced by a feeling, but that is the way propaganda and good media techniques work.
Right. It's all about the emotional entrainment, pairing the emotion with the belief.
Right.
Just, and for me, what's really, really interesting is, I love the fact that Obama got elected. It was a symbolic thing that made me cry. I love that. But very shortly, the hopium wore off. All the talk about hope, and then I was coming on my hopium high, and I'm like, well, where is anything, right? So it was a very clear thing for me. I can feel good about something, but just 6 months or a year later, I'm like, what? Why can I feel good about that?
Right. And so I take more, if we think about the Gnostics, G-N-O-S-T, Gnosticism. My understanding, and I'm not an expert on this, but their way of understanding reality in the world, they certainly relied on intuition, observation of nature, but they still use their intellect and rational thinking to try and using all those things together to try and deduce what is true, what is factual, how does this world work. So it was a combination of all of them. So my point is, when you have those strong emotional feelings of hope and joyfulness and everything else because you're hearing someone speaking, it's not always intuition. Sometimes you're actually being manipulated a little bit.
Right.
And so that's where you can't set your intellect aside completely and for an indefinite period of time, which is why a month after he gets elected, okay, still hold his feet to the fire. Let's still see what he's doing and pay attention to the reality on the ground. So that's my warning about the feeling thing.
Yeah.
Intuition, on the other hand, if it's intuition, I don't find that intuition's ever wrong. Feelings can be wrong. But an intuition, a strong intuition, especially as you exercise it like a muscle, you get a sense of things, and you learn how to listen to it. It's different for every person, so I don't exactly know how to share that. But I do generally get a gut feeling about things, and then I look for the evidence as well to verify that.
So, again, having, I got degrees in argument and rhetoric, and I remember one thing that was really interesting to me is that belief takes place, this is what the studies say, belief takes place and holds in place the more you find information and literature to support it. Right. So it's very easy to get excited about something, read up on it widely, and then have all your facts in a row, and then you're a convert at that point. Right. So it's kind of hard to separate that. I notice in my personal life, I was discussing this with my wife the other day, 9/11 happened and I was stunned. Or actually the first Gulf War happened and then I was stunned. No, I wasn't stunned. I was like, go kill him, right? Then 9/11 happened. I was stunned. And I started to see holes around me and started learning more and more and more. And so I kind of started, oh man, this was a big, big production. I mean, whether or not it was fake or not, certainly was run by people that we would hope we could trust, right? And then the COVID thing happens. And without a question, without a second thought, the day it was announced, I knew this is wrong. And that's what my intuition was telling me. So that grew over time. What can you say to somebody who's working on growing their intuition? What would you recommend? Because like you said, it's a muscle that you need to flex.
Well, it's a muscle, but then there's still a critical thinking aspect of it. Because, for example, when you understand media techniques, you start to see an MO, a modus operandi,
right.
The way they do things. And so when you see a narrative come out fully formed and everybody's saying the same thing,
right.
Everybody's
that whole
on
echo chamber.
Everybody's on cue. There's only one perspective presented. Anything else is not to be believed. Conspiracy theory, censored possibly. The censorship didn't start right away with this one. So for me, right away, that's the alarm. the red flags.
Right.
So knowing the MO is helpful because then you can decipher media. Because again, things are not as they seem when you really look into things. When we look at the number of scientists, the number of outspoken people who just aren't being listened to. Regarding those bigger trends, again, your question was regarding the intuitive side.
How do you exercise the intuition muscle so it becomes more reliable?
I think learning how to trust your own judgment and not looking to other people for confirmation.
Oh my gosh.
Do your own study and check yourself, because that's the one trap a lot of people fall into is, I think, there was a great physicist we had at Los Alamos. His name was Richard Feynman. A lot of people knew of Feynman. He was one of these kind of crazy guys, brilliant quantum theorist. And Feynman was quoted as saying, he goes, the first rule is that you must not fool yourself. And you're the easiest person to fool.
Oh my God, yes. Now, what is that? I remember in one of my rhetoric classes, or my introduction to speech classes, I was teaching Ben Franklin's plea to Continental Congress why they should pass the Constitution. He quotes a French woman saying, "I've never met anybody but myself who always has the right opinion." So for 200 years we've known that.
Right, exactly. So checking yourself, it's like even when I've been studying a thing for 3 years or 4 years and I've seen all the books, still there's a place when you say, am I crazy? Am I way off on this? I see that everyone else thinks very differently about this. And then I go and I just see fact after fact after fact, all of it verified, all of it very clear, and I say, no, I'm right on this. It's just that everyone else is unable to believe it. They're unable to look at it. They're unable to just look at evidence and be critical about it and kind of detached, an objective observer of the information. And so trusting yourself and not looking to others for validation. I would say that's the main part. And growing up, we're not taught that. We're taught to look to our elders, look to our teachers, listen to our parents,
Cite
listen
your
to everybody
sources
else,
and make sure that the ones that are trustworthy deemed by somebody else.
Right, exactly. And again, I'm not saying one doesn't have sources. You absolutely have sources, but I'm not looking to others for validation.
One of my mentors, Dr. Robert O. Weiss, he was my debate coach in college. He ran a class on deception, a seminar. I took it.
That's great.
And it was a really cool book. We read Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. And in 2 sentences, the basic tenet is editors and publishers decide what science is, not scientists.
Right.
And so that's that whole thing about funneling to sources that you can trust or not.
Recently we have, I think her name is Marcia Angel, and it might be pronounced Angel, I'm not sure, but Angell. You can find her on YouTube. I believe she was the editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association for years. And she's now giving talks where she's saying that nothing that's read in the medical journals can really be believed anymore.
And that's really what's getting really scary, is that the whole institutions are created, and if we trust it, there's great information out there. I don't want to get into all the falsehoods that are out there. Anybody with ears to hear and eyes to see can find it. So open your ears and your eyes if you're really interested. But all the institutions, medicine and everything, you're a quack, right? Because somebody spent a lot of money a long time ago to control these institutions that create these journals that say you're a quack, right? Even though it's nature, that deadly old nature. So let me just talk a little bit about courage, because you mentioned this, to trust yourself in light of an echo chamber around you that's doing something else. You're one of the co-founders of Unmasked. Can you briefly, Unmasked New Mexico, can you briefly just tell us what that is? And then once we get a sense of that, I want to ask you more about the courage it takes to actually do something like that.
Okay. From the very beginning, from February and early March, again, we had a lot of the red flags around the narrative that was starting to form, and there was a lot of information going back and forth, a lot of good articles. One of the websites that I found to be reliable is called globalresearch.ca. They're out of Canada. They're a good outfit. I really like the Ron Paul Institute, not because of their political leanings, but just because they're consistently honest. They don't have bias in their articles, and they publish the works of over 300 authors.
Nice.
So I can go there and always get an honest perspective, and they'll show both sides. I was exchanging emails with a small group of around 10 to 15 people, and we were seeing different pieces of information. We were putting it together, and it was really clear that a narrative was being crafted, and there was an agenda that was starting to be rolled out, and the facts on the ground didn't justify that agenda.
Right.
With, the cases and the severity of the cases. I mean, in the very first, I think, 4 weeks, you had the head of the Italian health ministry who announced that 95% of the deaths that they had in Italy were in people who were aged, I believe, 75 and older, and nearly all of them had one or more pre-existing conditions, and I think half of them had 2 or even 3 or more pre-existing conditions.
Just recently, the CDC finally admitted, CDC, who, believe them or not, finally admitted that 96% of all COVID deaths have comorbidities. And I know folks who, it's like in the Indian Health Services and part of the Navajo Nation, it's like, oh, we'll put COVID down here and then the government pays for your funeral.
Right.
All right, so if you look at the recent statistic that 200,000 deaths, we just passed that. So we're really looking at 8,000 or 9,000 deaths.
I believe it was, I went to the CDC website, and when I checked it a week ago, it said 6%.
Right, so 6%.
So 6% of 200,000 is 12,000.
Right, so yeah. Right, and just for reference, 80,000 people die a year from drinking. People say, oh, but that's a choice. No, that's something marketed and sold to us. And we don't shut down stores, and we don't shut down driving, and we don't wear masks because of drinking, right? Just so you're in perspective of what we do for things that make money versus what we do for things that we want to scare you about.
Right. And I don't think we're going to change people's thinking in this short 20-minute talk that we're having. So that was just my point in even bringing up the Italian health minister is early on we were seeing that there's this narrative about how deadly this thing is, and then the Italian health minister says yes, but, and then he gives us this bombshell of information. There was another website, and they were showing all the doctors around the world who were speaking out. And again, none of this was making it into the media. So again,
right.
MO, red flags, and that was why I started communicating with friends, and finally we said, we need to do something, because if we don't, who will? And I think that's the basis of most activism. You see an issue, whether it's, pollution of the oceans or, saving the rainforest or whatever else, you see a problem. And yes, if someone else is taking care of it, then maybe you don't need to. But when the problem isn't being addressed, sometimes you say, well, who's going to do anything about it if I don't?
Right.
So you step forward almost just out of a sense of, a personal obligation, a sense of obligation.
Some of the spiritual teachings I've learned was that if you want to be a warrior, you do what's necessary. Yeah. It's not about courage, it's about doing what's necessary.
Right, exactly. So we didn't even have a name for the group. We really just started by about 15 of us getting together, having conversations, sharing information with each other. Eventually we came up with the name Unmasked because one, it was a double meaning, obviously. One, we don't believe you should wear masks, and two, we wanted to unmask what was really going on, unmask the agenda. My co-founder was Chris Hassel, good friend. He and I have exchanged information. We've been friends for well over 10 years, and he's been a fabulous organizer and put in a lot of time and energy. So we've been meeting weekly, and we're a group of adults who choose to meet, exercise our freedom of assembly. Contrary to what people think, your individual rights guaranteed by the Constitution, not granted by the Constitution, but guaranteed by the Constitution, because they're inalienable. We're born with these rights. They don't get set aside just because there's an emergency. The founding fathers of this country, they certainly understood the nature of emergencies because they've been through wars and every other thing.
Right.
And it wasn't like they said, no, in an emergency you don't get any of those rights. So I understand the emergency, or the sense of emergency. I understand people's fears. I'm respectful to my friends. If I go to a friend's house and they said, I'd really like you to wear a mask, I say, okay, for you, I'll wear a mask if that makes you feel better. But the idea that the government can impose these types of measures, it's this encroachment. It's this gradual encroachment where we give up a little of our right here, and we give up a little of our right here, and the next thing we know, we're not standing on our own principles.
Yeah, people always sit there and say, how did the people in Nazi Germany actually allow what happened to go on? Right? How did they allow it? And then it's like, well, this is how, to me, we're just doing what you say, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more.
That's the direction it goes. And that sounds to the person who doesn't know about the agenda as you and I have studied it, to compare it with Nazi Germany and say, no, this is a health crisis, that isn't even a proper basis of comparison. But the agenda has been laid out. We have a group of individuals who, for example, there's the World Economic Forum. they're using this opportunity. They refer to it as the Great Reset. And they've written all kinds of position papers. And this is a plan years in the making. And they're using this as the opportunity to roll out their plan. So yes, right now it's masks, and masks seem harmless enough. You know, the first 2 weeks when this all started to happen, okay, asking a person to wear a mask for 2 weeks, I can understand that. You know, if it's for my friends or people are concerned, I understand. But here we are 6 months later, and the encroachment on freedoms has just continued. We have our governor and other governors acting like tyrants and authoritarians. We have our court system backing them, you know, at least in blue states. Red states have been standing up. Red states still stand for individual rights.
I know they just passed a law in South Dakota, no health mandates at all.
Right, it's great. And again, they're standing on the foundation of this country, constitutional principles.
I just want to say something because this was shocking for me, and I'm not trying to say, oh, we're turning into Nazi Germany. I'm not trying to say that at all. But I do want to make it clear that the people in power, whether it's the government or the ones behind them pulling the strings, are mass murderers. I mean, they've said no to hydroxychloroquine, which would, depending on which study you look at, including the Ford Research Foundation, which looked at 6 hospitals in the Detroit area, 50% cure rate,
right,
minimum.
Right.
Others go as high as 90% cure rate. So literally out of those 200,000 people they say are dead, they're responsible for 100,000 deaths. I learned this when I was looking at tobacco prevention. I did a lot of that work in this state. I was one of the people that helped the state go smoke-free, and I'm proud about that. And that's a government rule, and I'm happy to have done it.
Yeah.
Okay. But the reality is, I talked to all these lawmakers, and they're like, "Oh, you can't infringe on people. You know, it's their right for companies to sell addictive poison to children, and then once you're addicted, they say, oh, it's your choice." So there would be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths that would accumulate, and people would say, I'm okay with that. So I'm pretty much looking at these people as mass murderers, so it's just where I'm coming from. But go ahead.
The distinction I would make is that an individual, I mean, again, the Constitution was written for individuals with individuals in mind. And Benjamin Franklin's idea was that a constitution with a very simple set of laws really only works in a culture that's moral and that acts from conscience and that has some kind of inherent goodness where you care about your neighbors and you care about your community. And therefore, we don't need a really complex system of laws. The very nature of a corporation is that it's not moral.
Right.
It's you know, the directive of a corporation outlined by Milton Friedman. He very explicitly stated that the primary directive of the corporation is to maximize the return on the investor's investments.
Right.
And so therefore, if you can in some way take advantage of a situation or pollute the environment because you know you won't have to pay massive fines, or even if you have to pay the massive fines, well, the profits that you would accrue outweigh the fines paid, so we'll go ahead and do it. So corporations don't act according to a moral compass or conscience.
Right.
And so that whole idea that a corporation has the same rights as an individual, no, that whole argument, I know what the Supreme Court ruled.
I want to see him put a couple of corporations to death, right? You killed these many people, you die. And I want to see the directors held responsible. Then you could have as many rights as you want.
Right. It's not liability for what they're doing. And personal liability on the part of the people that actually make decisions.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that all corporations are bad, but they're not moral and they don't act from conscience. And so therefore that's the problem with those types of laws about saying a corporation has a right to sell its products or something else like that. No, an individual has a right to live freely and express himself and observe whatever religion he wants to, as long as it doesn't harm others. But if you're actually harming others, well, then you bear liability.
Yeah. So let me just change the direction of the conversation a little bit, because I want to get into courage. All right. The courage it takes to actually form a group, to be publicly known as one of the people who were advocating Unmasked. What was that like for you? Just not just internally, but personally, what you had to deal with around you?
You get dirty looks when you go out in public.
Yes.
Yeah. And there were very few confrontations, maybe because I'm a man. Now, some of the women in our group, I think they were confronted a little more. I understand that people are fearful, but the media has created this panic into people acting like this thing is going to kill me. I'm going to die if I'm around this person that doesn't have a mask on.
Right. You're killing me because you're going to have breathing air.
And it's taken to this. I mean, this idea, this whole "you're killing me." This has been explicitly stated in. It's one of the city council people in the greater Nashville area. I'm forgetting her name, but she wanted to put a law on the books that a person not wearing a mask could be charged with murder or attempted murder.
It's like, let's hold the people who are the victims of propaganda responsible. Let's not hold the propagandists responsible.
Right, and that's the type of hysteria that's been created. So again, I don't mean to be unsympathetic to people that have legitimate fears or people that have real health issues, and they're in that high risk group of 70 and above. But the way people are acting isn't justified by the facts on the ground. And
Right.
so I'm still acting rationally. I know what the actual risks are. I know the exact numbers for New Mexico in terms of deaths and cases and what percentage of those cases end up in deaths and everything else. And so I'm acting from my own sense of conscience and what I feel is right. And so that for that reason, the dirty looks, I know that people are uninformed and they've been manipulated by a media that's made them very, very fearful.
So let me press you a little bit further, okay?
Okay.
You're acting from your consciousness. To me, that takes great courage. Did you find any internal resistance, or how did you deal with just saying, I am going to speak my truth, I'm going to act my truth?
No, I didn't have any resistance, and in fact, at times there are certain stores that they require the mask, even if you have a health issue, even if you can document that you have a health issue. They say, well, we're a private establishment, we can refuse service to anybody, and we'll accommodate you. You wait out here on the curb. And I knew that was going to take 30 minutes, so I put on a mask, went in the store. It was actually harder for me to keep the mask on because I knew that I was in some way agreeing with or obeying an unjust law. And Gandhi, I'm going to paraphrase kind of roughly, but Gandhi said the most effective way to assist evil is to obey an unjust order or dictate.
Wow. Yeah.
So we're almost, if we know the nature of what's happening, we're almost morally obliged to act according to our conscience. I mean, that was what Thoreau's Civil Disobedience was all about, one of the great works. So this is simply a form of civil disobedience. And again, if I'm around a friend and they say, please, if you come in my house, would you wear a mask? I'm not going to disrespect my friend. I understand. But if that friend comes into my house, no, they come to my house, it's our rules in our house. And if you're not comfortable with that, well, then come another time.
Right. You decided to buy the fear programming, and you
Right.
can't blame people for what their choices they make. My neighbor was yelling at me the other day, how can you believe this stuff? And I'm like, because I'm not afraid. And then I got yelled at some more, and I'm like, God bless you, and extended the conversation, because what do you say, right? I'm not going to buy into the fear and stuff. I want to talk about sovereignty, all right? In America, I grew up with this teachings that you have to fight for your freedom. And the more I'm in this process of awakening, the more I think that that's just the oxymoron of oxymorons, You don't fight for freedom, you be free for freedom. You fight for fightdom, okay? So what about sovereignty? How do you be sovereign in this environment that we're in today?
I would say the starting point is to understand individual rights. And when we talk about rights, again, if we think about the Constitution, a lot of people think the Constitution gives us rights. The Constitution didn't give us any rights. The Constitution very clearly explains that these are God-given, inalienable rights, and it's the government's job to protect those rights and to observe those rights and to make sure that that the government doesn't infringe on those rights. Those rights were a result of, actually, a lot of the Constitution and its origins dates back to the Iroquois Confederacy, which was the Native Americans of the Northeast.
Say more, please.
And the Iroquois Confederacy was 5 and then later 6 Indian nations that formed a working government. They created a separation of powers in structure where they had kind of the equivalent of a judicial system. They gave women certain powers that actually in our Constitution we never gave women in America those same powers. So they were actually slightly ahead of us in some ways.
Yes!
There's a great book on comparison by a local author named Gregory Schaaf, S-C-H-A-A-F. It's the U.S. Constitution and the Great Law of Peace. And he compares the two documents, the founding document of the Iroquois Confederacy and our U.S. Constitution. And you see that we borrowed heavily from it. And Schaaf actually pulled up what's called the Morgan Papers. He discovered them, and I believe the authors, or the man whose name they were given, was George Morgan. I could be wrong on that first name. And he was the head of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in like 1770, and he had a record of all these communications and letters with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, and they were looking at the Iroquois Confederacy and deciding, okay, how do we implement this and change it just a little bit so it works for our system of government?
Cool.
So my reason for even bringing it up is that it seems that the Native Americans had an understanding of natural law. An individual is born into this world, they're a free soul. Even a child, when you try and tell a child what to do, somehow they know that they're free. Now, yes, they may need some discipline and they may need some guidance because they are a child, they could get themselves in trouble, but they know they're free. And so that's within us. Those qualities that are just built into the wiring inside of us, that's what we consider natural law, to know that you're free. And so natural law seems to be what was used as the basis for creating our Bill of Rights and observing those same rights. Individuals are born with those rights, government didn't give them. So back to sovereignty. In this time, we're told, we're raised in schools being told to listen to our teachers, listen to the authorities, but when you follow orders constantly, you're not able to act from your own conscience. There are certain times when you need to disobey an order or disobey an unjust law. And so sovereignty really means standing up for what you feel is right, and at the same time, making sure that you're checking in with yourself. It doesn't mean I'm going to do whatever I want and everybody else be damned. It's, no, I know that I'm a good person. I'm going to act from conscience. I'm going to do what I feel is right here. And it doesn't really matter what everybody else thinks of me because I'm not looking for their approval.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the nice thing that happens, I hear a lot of people when they reach like age 50 or 60, I know a lot of people say, I feel so free now because I just stopped giving a damn what everybody else thinks of me. And it's like, why did it take 60 years to get to that place where finally you're a lady who says, I just don't give, I'm going to speak my mind, I don't care anymore. And so for me, it's like, I think that's the natural state of things. We should speak up. And yes, we're respectful towards others. We're not trying to offend everybody. But, why are we so worried about what everybody else thinks?
Yeah. So let me run something by you. I was listening to a commentator, and it struck a chord in me, and I just would like your take on this. She was saying, what if you were 100% certain that you were safe? What if you were 100% certain that you create your reality in connection with your spirit, your divine, whatever you want to call it? What if you were 100% certain that, how would you act in the middle of all this negativity? How would you act in the middle of what this so-called crisis narrative, if you had that knowledge? To me, that was very, very interesting. It was like, my sovereignty comes from knowing that I've got this. I've got this covered, whatever this is, right? I've got it covered. And so I can go into the world with ease. I'd like to hear your take on that.
Well, I might qualify it a little, because when I say knowing that I'm safe, my concern isn't really for my safety or even for anyone saying anything else to me. Obviously, everyone's concern with this is, okay, we're doing this for everybody else. We're acting in the interest of the greater good. And again, they've left out a huge piece, and that is that effective treatments for this exist.
Tons.
Like you said, there's the hydroxychloroquine. Now, I know that's been a controversial issue, but that's because of the media's distortion of the facts.
Even the nasal steroids are getting really good results.
Right. There's a doctor in Texas. His name's Richard Bartlett. He uses a treatment called budesonide. It's a steroidal anti-inflammatory. He has 100% success. There's another doctor in Texas, Brian Proctor. You can find him on YouTube as well. Both of them are found on YouTube. He also is using a slightly different treatment, costs less than $50, 100% success. The hydroxychloroquine, I think they also did a meta-study, and this is the most revealing of all of them. The meta-study was all the countries that have followed the data on the use of hydroxychloroquine over the last 6 months. And the entire patient base is 2.77 billion people, so about 40% of the world's population. And they found in the people that used hydroxychloroquine, in the early stages, not the latest stage when you're really sick, but in those early stages, they had 80% success rate, 80% less deaths in those places. So there are effective treatments. And so that whole idea about being safe, well, I'm not just thinking about myself. those other people, I don't feel that I'm endangering anyone else. There are
They're
effective
safe
treatments.
too, whether they believe it or not.
This isn't absolutely deadly. Yes, I know people are scared. I know some people have gotten very sick, and I don't wish it on anybody. But it doesn't justify what they've done. I know far more suffering due to business losses,
Oh my God.
bankruptcies,
That's so selective, and it's so,
homelessness.
oh yeah.
And again, normally our media is very good at covering the human component because they're pulling on our heartstrings. We need to do this because, for example, the immigration issue. Oh, look at the poor people who are being denied their rights or something like that. And yet the human interest, the human aspect regarding homelessness, job loss, domestic abuse, alcoholism and increases in alcoholism, drug use. I mean, I think alcohol sales have increased something like 6-fold.
Here's like the old I Love Lucy show. You got some splaining to do, because
Right.
when it comes down to it, we're going to see that the amount of deaths caused by the people running this show. And I want to see what kind of humanity we have. Are we going to be a lynch mob when we find out? When most of the people find out? You and I already know, and we're okay with it. We're not like taken to the streets with pitchforks, but that's a possibility. Or will we see compassion? Or will we actually see justice? Will we actually see accountability? I'm very interested to see what happens when people awareness filters beyond just this small circle that are already getting it.
I actually think we'll see denial.
To start with, yes.
There are a lot of people that even so they'll insist that, well, the leaders did their best and so they made some mistakes. That's one of the way outs a lot of people allow our government, and our government takes advantage of that one all the time. This whole idea of the bumbling bear, like, oh, I just made a mistake, I didn't know. Iraq, we meant well, but we didn't know. No, you had a lot of advisors. You had top officials saying you cannot do this. Don't go into this country. You're gonna leave the country in shambles. And it's this whole idea of we made some mistakes. So the public is generally forgiving. It's very hard for them to see those things. So honestly, I'm inclined to think that now the public that is willing to see it, I think they're just going to call for justice, and they're going to call for people to be held accountable. I don't think they're going to take to the streets and pitchforks. I think they're just going to say we can't have this kind of criminality in our country.
Yeah, I know. I'm more hopeful in that I suspect that within 2, maybe 3, hopefully 4 election cycles, 4-year cycles, discernment's going to be so widespread that people will just say, oh, liar again, and the whole political system will crumble as we know it, just because discernment will not allow that to go on. That's what my hope is.
I think it might even happen more quickly than that, because the more in censorship they engage in, they being the people that are trying to control the narrative, the more the truth is coming out, and it's waking people up. So, for example, there was the America's Frontline Physicians.
Right, that was pretty amazing.
And they had something like 18 or 20 million views in the first 20 hours or 24 hours, and then it was censored. And so here you have doctors who are treating, the people on the ground who are dealing with this crisis, and then they're defamed. At least one of them lost their job. Simone Gold was fired from her position by her hospital.
Right. Another one was investigated by their medical board, the state senator from Minnesota.
Right. And so when we see that actually wakes a lot of people up. I had a lot of people who actually contacted me and said, what is going on? And they were upset that it wasn't available anymore, and it actually started to wake them up.
Well, it's actually good, because now we've got YouTube, your YouTube, BitChute. We're starting to see alternatives arise, and I think the old mother is an invention. Right? I think we're seeing that our backs are against the wall, and we're more creative than just saying, I've got no choice, what can I do here? So there's actually some good coming from it, although it's really horrible.
Yeah, but I do believe that the more overt the measures they use in order to control the public and force us to comply, again, that's that thing where people know something's wrong, and it starts to wake them up a little bit. And so I understand what you're saying. Change takes a while. But I'm hopeful that people are going to start to look at the media with a more skeptical eye, even here in the next 2 to 4 years.
Today. After you see this. So I've been steering this conversation. What do you want to say? Any topics or issues you want to discuss right now?
One thing I would say about standing up for truth, for example, or whatever you feel strongly about, is you do it because you feel a moral obligation to. No one else is doing it, and accepting it just isn't an option. You know, I flash back on Henry Kissinger talking about the Vietnamese and us not winning the Vietnam War, and he said, how is it that a third-rate nation won't eventually just give up? Why won't these people just give up? I'm paraphrasing badly, but, and you have to understand that what was their other option?
Yeah.
Where were they going to go? You know, people just can't not exist. I mean, that's those with the agenda would kind of like that, or just get them to roll over. They're not going to. That was their nation. They're going to stand up for it. So there are a lot of people that you go into this and you don't know if you're going to win, but you do it because not doing something is not an option, and just complying is not an option.
So I'm going to use that now. I ran for governor in the last cycle,
Yeah.
mainly so I could sit next to the incumbent governor and say bullshit when things are being said, which didn't get me any friends, but it was quite fun. And you know, I felt a calling to do that, but now I'm going to start using this line. You know, what option? You can't just let this stuff go on. You got to stand up where you can. Right. So I'm just going to rewrite history here. Thank you.
That's good.
So how can people get in touch with you? How can we find out more about Unmasked?
Unmasked has a website, www.unmasked.icu.
ICU.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that was an interesting domain. We didn't know it was out there, but we got that one.
All right.
There's a good amount of information there. We've got it organized pretty well. And again, I think the first thing people need to kind of wrap their mind around is, you know, or it's an exercise I do with people. If I use a hypothetical scenario, if I could provide you absolutely definitive evidence that the mainstream story is loaded with fraud and is largely inaccurate, would you look at it?
Yeah, right. Good exercise.
And a lot of times people will respond and they'll say, well, you don't have, and I said, no, this is a hypothetical scenario. You don't get to change the hypothetical scenario, so it's one that you like, and then you can answer that one. I'm saying, no, big if I could provide definitive evidence that there's fraud all throughout the story, would you accept it? Well, if you could, well, I don't think I believe it anyway.
Right,
you know, that's or I don't think I don't want to believe that, or I want to believe that they're good people. And so what happens is I kind of take people through that kind of an exercise to see, are you even open to the information in the first place? Because I find that about 7 out of 10 people, they'll answer no, or they'll change the hypothetical situation and say, well, you can't provide that evidence. And so we provide information at our website. That's why I'm talking about this, is at the website. There's a lot of information there. It's not a lot of things we're saying. We're just showing the videos, showing the evidence, showing the good scientists and doctors who are speaking out. But one needs to go with something of an open mind.
Right.
And a lot of people, they don't want to face that, because you have to reorient your entire worldview to realize that you've been lied to in a very big way. It's not that there's no illness. We're not saying that there's no disease, and we're not saying that it wouldn't be harmful if you caught it. But it doesn't justify the amount of suffering that's being created.
I just want to reinforce this. I mentioned this a few videos ago when I was interviewing one of the screenwriters for the movie Pandemic 2. The Danny Katz interview. I think it's called Living Consciously in the Age of Censorship, if you're interested. But I just want to say this here. These are some spiritual teachings I was given. It's the mind games.
Yeah.
And you know, this is really what needs to be enlightened, is to stop playing mind game. Game number 1, I'm right. Number 2, you're wrong.
Right.
Number 3, I got good reasons for what I do. 2, your reasons are bullshit. 3 or 4, then 5, I should be in control because my reasons are good. And your reasons stink, number 6, so you shouldn't be in control. And that's the game everybody's playing. And I think that's what you just called out. You know, that's what you said. 7 out of 10 people are not willing to get past step number 1. I'm right, you're wrong.
Yeah.
It really opens things up when you can do that.
Or they just understand that they might not even feel that they're right. The idea of accepting this very uncomfortable truth that the lie is very, very big. And you have a lot of people going along with it.
It messed me up really bad after I watched some 2011 videos and stuff to realize there are people in my government trying to kill me.
Right.
Not me personally, but they did a bunch of people in New York and blew up a bunch of other folks, you know? I mean, I've got people who supposedly are government leaders actively trying to kill. I mean, that was a real hard thing to take in.
Right. Again, we look at any war. I mean, you know, I think the deaths in the Iraq war were 1 to 2 million civilians, mostly women and children. I mean, these were official numbers quoted by Noam Chomsky and others, those numbers have been around for a very long time. The hydroxychloroquine, there were the deaths that could have been avoided if we had hydroxychloroquine in America, and we allowed it to be used. Yeah, it's hard to wrap one's mind around those things, which is why it's not even that a person insists they're right. It's just that I can't believe that the lie is that big.
It's so
I can't believe that it could be that way, because again, like I said, I grew up in the Midwest, so a lot of people are really good and really wholesome, and they would take care of their neighbors, and they'd use their tractor to dig someone out of their driveway in the winter months when it's cold. I mean, people are really kind, but they're so trusting that they just trust the media and the newspapers, and they trust their leaders.
It's really just a few people who have pulled the strings to accumulate the wealth and control. It's not, people are generally good. If I had to pick 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10, 98 out of 100, people are generally good. It's just a few people that are really, really just working it in a bad way.
And a lot of the other people, they're following orders, and somehow they get wrapped up in it, and they make this thing look a particular way, and they didn't really want to do a particular thing, but they're following orders. So, for example, there was the hospital fakery, and I believe it was Michigan. I believe it was Lansing, Michigan, and there was CBS filmed the hospital, and hospital employees later came forward and said that we were filming this scene for testing, but no one had really come for testing aside from a few cars. So our hospital administrator asked us, the employees of the hospital, to get in our cars to make this photo shoot, to make it look like there was a really long line at the hospital. They got caught red-handed. CBS was making it look like the hospital was flooded, and 90% of them were hospital employees.
I just saw Charlie Ward on his channel talking about interviewing a police officer in Spain, a female one, who went to a hospital where the whole top floor was filled with COVID patients. She gets there, it's empty, so she gets a bunch of her colleagues to look at it. So 17 policemen in their city resign over this. And so he does a video, just hers telling what she saw. That got banned. So again, it's right and left.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not that all the people are bad. A lot of people are following orders, and even if they went whistleblower, no one's listening to them anyway. We've got whistleblower people that have tried to blow the whistle, and it's just hard for people to believe. And so where I was going with that about, most Americans are good and really trusting, and that's the place that if you really want to understand reality, you need to push up against that place in yourself that's willing to be a little uncomfortable to see what's actually going on. And if you're not willing to go there, well, unfortunately, you're going to lose more and more of your rights, and you're not going to be equipped to make good decisions and know how to deal with things. Like, for example, because I'm looking for other information, I know of several viable treatments for this illness. If a loved one of mine got this illness, I would know where to go. So in that sense, knowledge is power. I know the clinics I can go to. I know the doctors that are offering this treatment. Not everybody is, and not everybody knows about this, but I would know where to go, and we would have a much greater chance of success than someone else who's unwilling to face uncomfortable treatments.
Right. So can people contact you through the website in case they want a speaker or somebody to do a workshop, if you do those kinds of things?
Best way would be for them to reach out to me directly. I'll provide my email address. It's Michael Blanshan, MICHAEL BLANSHAN @fastmail.com.
All right, and I'm not going to post it directly below the video and the audio, but I'm going to have a word @ and a space, and then you'll be able to get that. So that's Michael Blanchin @fastmail.com.
And our website for Unmasked is, again, www.unmasked.icu.
Great. So please remember, like, share, subscribe, and follow so that this information can get out to more people, that we can become awesome. That's the whole thing, is I'm doing these interviews because I want to show you examples of people who are stepping out into the world, becoming awesome. And I think Michael Blanchin is beautiful. Thank you so much for doing this interview. Last words?
Happy to present this information for you all, and I would just ask, be willing to face some uncomfortable truths. That was what started me on my path. And it is a process. You get past the fear, there's the anger at a point, you get past the anger, and then you know what to do. Then you can take action.
Here you go, the 3 steps of becoming sovereign.
Yeah, that's good.
Very, very cool.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, many blessings. Stay blessed, everybody.